We've got here the first quotation. Foul, fair is foul, and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. First bit we're going to look at is fair is foul. This is an example of antithesis, or opposites. Fair and foul, fair meaning beautiful, foul meaning disgusting. It's also alliteration, the repetition of the S sound there at the beginning of the words. The witches believe the opposite of the audience. So the audience believe fair is beautiful, the witches think it's disgusting. This puts them outside of the natural order, outside the chain of being. It sets them up as something outside of society. They are an other. On the other hand, we've got foul is fair. This is a palindrome. It makes this line the same forwards as it is backwards. So forwards it's fair is foul and foul is fair. Read that backwards. Fair is foul and foul is fair. This kind of emphasises this idea of the reversal of the natural order of things. Now we've got the word hover down here. To hover is a verb, and the ability to hover defies nature. It's not just flight, but it's almost floating instead. It's eerie, it's like a ghost. Most things that fly move around very quickly. Hovering is something kind of unnatural. It's worth noting that some birds of prey hover. Its ability to hover shows that the witches have very fine control over the elements being earth, air, water and wind. This is a power that should be reserved for God alone. Earth, air, fire and water is the elements. Last bit we're looking through is the fog and the filthy air. So you've got the alliteration of the F's again there. But we could talk about classic tragedy, classic Greek tragedy. In those stories, pollution was always a sign of something being wrong with nature. And here the witches are polluting the air. The air is filthy. So the witches are clearly unnatural. This is our next quotation from Act 1, Scene 3 from Banquo. The earth hath bubbles as the water has, and these are of them. This is said just after the witches disappear. So we've got the words earth and water here. Banquo is spotting that the witches are somehow connected to the elements. We can link that back to the previous quotation where we said that the witches are in control of the elements, a power that really only God should have, so they're outside the natural order. Banquo said the earth hath bubbles. It doesn't. Water has bubbles. The earth doesn't. It's an unnatural idea. Again, Banquo says that they're somehow outside the natural order because they're affecting the elements in ways that should be impossible. Bubbles increase in size as they go upwards through water, and this can be seen as being like the influence of the witches' words to Macbeth as the play progresses. The witches say some very, very simple things. You will be the Thane of Cawdor, you will be king. Two very, very short sentences, but the impact of those sentences increases as the play goes along, just like bubbles through water. Our next quotation is also from Act 1, Scene 3, towards the end of the act, towards the end of the scene. Here, Macbeth says, the witch's words cannot be ill, cannot be good. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion against the use of nature? You can see here through the ellipses that I have cut some of this quotation out. It was too long, so I cut some bits out, and that's what the ellipses here represent. First bit we're going to look at is the first time. The witch's words cannot be ill, cannot be good. Again, we've got the antithesis here, ill and good. So the antithesis of good and ill links Macbeth's words back to the witch's fair is foul. It also implies that Macbeth knows that the witch's words alone have no power. It's what he chooses to do based on those words that will be important. So the words themselves aren't good, aren't bad, it's what they cause. that is going to be important. And he says, if good, why do I yield to that suggestion? There's two important words here. Macbeth describes himself as yielding to the witch's ideas. To yield is to give up in battle. This is not something that Macbeth normally does. We see him in Act 1, Scene 2, being a great warrior. Yielding or submitting is not in his nature. So already, straight after the witches have given their prophecies, Macbeth is changing his nature based on their words. At the end of this, the word suggestion is used to describe the witches' words. They're not commands, not prophecies, suggestions. You will be king. Again, this shows that Macbeth is not being forced to do anything. It's ultimately his own decision that causes the events of the play. At the end here, we've got against the use of nature. Nature here means not only Macbeth's own nature, which is starting to act differently, as we've just seen, but also he's acting against the natural order. To become king, he'll need to perform an unnatural act. He needs to kill the king. He should be obeying the king, he should be listening to the king, not murdering him. I have massively failed here because I should say underneath there Lady Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 5. She says, "Come you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here." This is the first line of her soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 5. The first word we can look at is come. It's an imperative verb. Women were supposed to be submissive by nature in Shakespeare's time. Women weren't supposed to be giving commands. It's not a feminine thing to do. Lady Macbeth's nature should be feminine, but she's going against her nature by giving commands, by using these imperatives. Spirits, come you spirits. Spirits, quite simply, not part of the chain of being. They're not part of God's order. They're outside that chain of being, outside of God's order. So she is trying to mess with God's plan. She is trying to deal with things that are not in God's purview. And we've got the word unsex. It's a strange imperative verb. It's not something you hear very often, unsex. Shows that she's wishing to be less feminine. She's trying to change her nature again. She's trying to change her God-given place. God made her a woman. Therefore, she should act in a certain way. To not act in that way, to not act in a feminine manner, is going against God's wishes. Our final quote from Act 1 is from Act 1, Scene 7, and it's Lady Macbeth. "When in swinish sleep their drenched nature lies in a death, what cannot you and I perform upon the unguarded Duncan?" She's talking here about getting the guards drunk so that they can kill Duncan. First word that we want to look at is swinish, which is an adjective. Swinish sleep. This links to the rest of the animal imagery throughout the play. You've got the bird imagery, you've got the snake imagery, toads, bats, all sorts of kind of animals there. The guards have metaphorically been turned into pigs. This is almost a witch-like act. She has changed them from humans into pigs. Not literally, only figuratively, because their sleep is like they are pigs. But their natures have been changed by the spirits that Lady Macbeth has used. You can see how these ideas are starting to come together. Lady Macbeth has changed their nature. She has used the spirits, which is something outside nature, to do that. And she has used imperatives to command those spirits, which is against her natural, which is against her nature. Here we get in the word itself, drenched nature. They are drenched because she has got them drunk. And drunkenness was seen as a sin. It was overindulgence. It's something you shouldn't do. Also, it changes your nature. You are different when you are drunk. You act differently. Some people get violent, some people get silly, but it changes a person's nature. The fact that it's a sin, again, going against God, going against nature. And finally, we've got the unguarded Duncan. Duncan is vulnerable when nature is in a death. So nature needs to be asleep. Natural laws need to be suspended in order for the Macbeths to commit the murder. They're contemplating an unnatural act, and that can only succeed when the natural laws of justice are suspended.